Now, if you watch my video where I rank every mainline FNAF game, you probably remember when I said this. This standalone indie game made by a developer with one last shot to become one had released tons of sequels, spin-offs, a graphic novel trilogy, 2 Goosebumps-inspired book series, and a full-length feature film by Blumhouse. Well, that line is very obvious to why I'm making this video. If you're a FNAF fan, you're probably familiar with the development hell the Five Nights at Freddy's movie went through to become one of the biggest achievements the franchise has reached. From multiple scripts being scrapped, directors leaving the project, Blumhouse being in charge of the project and not Warner Brothers, and delayed film dates multiple times. It still amazes me that this movie still got made despite the shit it went through. Now, I'm not going to cover all of it, but if you want to watch a video about the entire history of the FNAF movie, I highly recommend watching this video made by Isaiah Master and Andrew Drunk 30,000. If you have the time after watching this video, please go watch it. It's so good. And it's almost crazy to think that this movie turned 1 year old today. So in honor of that, I'm going to do a retrospective of the movie to see if it still lives up to the hype of the fans. This review will be going over the good, the movie's biggest strengths, some elements that I'm mixed on, things I didn't like nor hate, and the bad, the movie's biggest weaknesses, and what it should improve on when it comes to its future movies. So without further ado, this is my review of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie 1 year in. Overhyped by the fans, or overhated by the critics. But before I do that, I'm doing the annoying YouTube thing where I ask you that 8.8 out of 91.2% of you guys haven't subscribed yet. So if you haven't, please help a brother out by subscribing. It's free and it helps out the channel grow. Also hit the notification bell to never miss an upload. Anyways, let's move on. For starters, let's go over the positives. The first and most obvious one, the animatronics. They look great and heavily accurate to the games. I feel like Blumhouse could have easily been influenced to go the route of using CGI, which thank God they didn't, but then making the choice to get Jim Henson's Creature Shop to work on the animatronics was a really genius move on their part. And the fact that they're returning to the sequel, which I'll talk about near the end of the video, just proves that practical effects is so much better than using CGI. The set piece of the pizzeria is so cool, and looking like what I think a real-life Freddy's Pizzeria should look like if it opened one day. The first game made the pizzeria look like a place a child wouldn't want to go to for their birthday because of how boring it looks. In the movie, however, it does look like a magical place for kids and grown-ups alike where fantasy and fun come to life. The little 8-bit opening sequence feels like a nod to the original 8-bit minigames and shows one of the franchise's major plot beats that will give their audiences a good understanding if they're unfamiliar with the franchise. The actors give a solid performance, but the main standout for me personally is Matthew Lillard as William Afton. It's glad to see him make a tremendous comeback in the horror genre, playing the most iconic video game protagonist of all time. And he doesn't disappoint. His version of Afton Headley reminds me of Stu from the first Scream movie. He even does the little knife swipe. The soundtrack by the Newton Brothers is very catchy, sounding like a throwback to synth soundtracks. The fan service in here is pretty nice, and if you're a fan of the series, you're gonna spot it from the get-go. Only to proceed in a ramble on into a new viewer to explain the reference to them. My favorites being the YouTuber cameos, Sparky the dog in the parts and service room, and even the Living Tombstone's first ever FNAF song playing in the ending credits. And my last positive I have is that the kills are pretty decent despite having a PG-13 rating. While they do happen off screen, although the aftermath is pretty brutal, the ones that happen on screen are kinda gruesome, especially the Springlock scene. That was handled pretty well in my opinion. Now I'm going to keep this segment of the review very short and simple, as there are a few things I'm mixed about in this entire movie. The first thing I'm semi-mixed on is the torture device that was introduced in the very beginning, or some people call him Torture Freddy. Now this is probably the movie's version of being stuffed inside a suit, as Phone Guy described in the Night 1 phone call of the first game, but if not, then I don't see its purpose. Granted, the mystery of Torture Freddy could be answered in the second movie, but I just don't even know why he even exists to begin with in the first place. Another thing I'm heavily mixed on is the frequent dream sequences Mike has. I get it. It's supposed to show the trauma of his little brother getting kidnapped and the missing children that were murdered in Freddy's. And while it was important to include these scenes to build up suspense and mystery, I was just bored out of my mind and just felt like a chore to get through. And the last element I'm mixed on is the infamous fort scene. While I think this scene is lore accurate to the games, signifying that the animatronics at the end of the day are just possessed by spirits of dead kids, not some sort of AI gone wrong, it just felt hella out of place for a horror movie. But yeah, I don't hate these elements, but I necessarily didn't like them either. Now, as a FNAF fan, I did have problems with this movie as it went on. While I respect Blumhouse and Scott for making this behemoth of a project that's been announced since 2015, there were so many flaws it severely suffers from. For starters, the story. It's just so fucking messy. But hey, this is FNAF we're talking about. It's so out of place and there's so many things happening to where I can't keep up. There's even an unnecessary subplot where a bunch of vandals hired by Mike's aunt to break into Freddy's to get him fired that I think could have been removed from the final cut and nothing would have changed. While the actors do a decent job of acting, the dialogue they were given was so questionable. I know Scott's a game developer, not writer or storyteller, but having this man write the script was probably not the best move. You can make the argument that Scott being the writer helped this movie as it stuck to its roots, but man, Scott can't write to save his goddamn life. The puppeteer work for the cupcake looked so goofy to where I couldn't take this little shit seriously. When it was revealed that Golden Freddy would be in the movie from the first still, I was hoping he would play a huge role in the story, but the massive potential for this character was wasted, having to do barely anything with it. Same thing goes with Afton. He's only in the first act, doesn't show his face once, then shows up in the latter half of Act 3. I really wished he had more screen time because he's such a great adaptation of the game and book variations of himself. And the last piece of criticism and my last critique is that for a horror movie based on a horror game, it's not even remotely scary. While it was scary for the opening scene of Act 1, the first half of Act 2, and the finale of Act 3, I didn't get startled once during the movie. And that's because the movie doesn't know what it wants to be at times, shifting to a whodunit, a horror, to even a comedy. And that's kind of embarrassing because there are so many PG-13 horror movies I know that are actually scarier than this film. And that's pretty much about it. In conclusion, while having so many cons, the Five Nights at Freddy's movie had one job and one job only: to be a passionate love letter to the FNAF community. Whether it be the fans who were hooked on the franchise since 2014, or the fans in 2021 when it got a resurgence to the security breach. And as a fan since 2014, practically a veteran at this point, as an adaptation of the franchise, it succeeds at that very well. But if someone were to watch it and have no history with the IP whatsoever, then they'll likely be 99.99% chance be hella confused. But I'm happy I liked it despite its glaring issues. For a rating, I'll give it a 7 to 7.5 out of 10. It stays true to itself in respect to the source material, but points do get taken off for its writing, story, and lack of scare factor. But hey, hopefully by the time you're watching this video, while the FNAF movie turns 1 year old, the second Five Nights at Freddy's movie begins filming today in New Orleans, with it wrapping up on January 31st of next year, meaning it could fix the problems people have with the first movie and apply it to the second movie, but better. So if anyone has plans with me on December 5th, 2025, cancel them immediately, you'll probably know where I'll be. And the fact that the third film is already in the works is just so crazy to me, but I hope they don't rush it out and just take their sweet time with it. But until we meet again, this is That One Gorehound signing off, and remember to have a bloody good day or night. Bye bye.